I've learned that silence has its own vocabulary. It hums through the walls, it breathes between ticking seconds, it fills the house the way dust fills forgotten corners. That afternoon, it was all I had, until the phone rang. My name is Margaret Hale, and what you're about to hear are the echoes of a life divided between love, loss, and truth. If my story touched you, stay close. Subscribe, and walk with me through every chapter. It was one of those indecisive afternoons when the sky can't decide whether to rain or to surrender to light, the kind of day when memories drift through the house like ghosts who've misplaced their exits. I had just folded Robert's last winter coat. I still can't bring myself to give it away, when the sound shattered the stillness. 3 rings, that was all. Then a pause long enough to make me think it was a mistake, but it wasn't. "Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry for your loss, but there's something you need to see." The voice was soft, almost too careful, as if wrapped in velvet to hide a blade. I remember the way my name sounded in her mouth, formal, respectful, and yet intimate. A stranger shouldn't sound that familiar. "Who is this?" I asked. "Evelyn," she said. "I worked with your husband, at the firm." The words "your husband" fell heavy, like stones thrown into still water. The ripples reached all the way to my chest. I remembered the name, Evelyn, faintly, like a perfume that lingers in a coat you haven't worn in years. She used to answer Robert's calls, schedule his meetings, send him reminders that he always claimed to barely read. Funny how I remember that now. But her tone that day wasn't the tone of an assistant. It was the tone of someone who knew more than she should. Someone who had waited for the right moment and had chosen mine. She said she needed to see me, to bring something personally. "It's about Robert," she added, "and about closure." Closure. The word tasted like iron. People use it to pretend grief can be organized, as if pain were paperwork waiting for a signature. But there's no closure for the kind of loss that rewrites the air in your lungs. Still, I agreed to meet her. "Tomorrow," I said, "at my home." After I hung up, I stood still in the living room, surrounded by things that once meant safety. The ticking clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the framed photo of us at the lake. Suddenly, each one seemed to belong to a stranger's life. Have you ever noticed how grief changes even the furniture? The same chair where he once read the paper now looked like an empty witness, watching me, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a forgotten document, a condolence visit, but deep down I knew. There's a tone in a woman's voice that carries truth like static under silk. Evelyn had that tone. The rest of the evening stretched endlessly. I made tea, I didn't drink. I sat by the window and watched the rain hesitate above the city, falling in reluctant drops, like it too was afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I thought about Robert, about his habits, the way he always straightened his tie twice before leaving, how he hummed quietly when reviewing papers, the way he said "soon" when I asked about retirement. Every detail felt suddenly suspect, as if the past itself had been edited behind my back. When you've loved someone for decades, you think you know their every shade. But what if the person you loved had rooms you were never invited into? What if their silence wasn't peace, but strategy? I went to bed, but sleep was a stranger that night. Grief had already made me familiar with loneliness, but suspicion was a new tenant, noisier, more invasive. It paced through my thoughts, rearranging the furniture of memory. Around midnight, I found myself in the hallway, barefoot, tracing my fingers along the wallpaper. Every small sound became an accusation. The creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the old windows, the hum of the heater. The whole house seemed to be holding its breath. And then I saw it. Robert's briefcase, still by the desk. I had avoided opening it for months, afraid of the intimacy of ordinary things. His pen, his notes, a folded napkin from a dinner I wasn't at. Grief is cruel that way. It hides its sharpest edges in the familiar. I sat there staring at that case, thinking of Evelyn's voice. Something about her calmness unsettled me more than if she had cried. Calm people in moments of tragedy always know something others don't. And I kept wondering, why now? Why me? Why her? Sometimes I think the dead have their own ways of confessing, through the living they once touched. I walked to the window and opened the curtains. The rain had turned steady now, washing the world in silver streaks. The reflection in the glass showed me a version of myself I didn't recognize, someone between widowhood and awakening. Have you ever looked at your reflection and realized it knows more than you do? The night carried that kind of weight. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast, not danger, not yet, but revelation. I didn't know it then, but that single phone call would unearth more than secrets. It would expose the quiet wars fought beneath love, the ones we never name because doing so would make them real. When dawn finally came, it wasn't gentle. The light crawled into the room, pale and deliberate, touching every photograph, every reminder of what was. The air felt different, charged, like the moment before a confession. Tomorrow, Evelyn would arrive, and with her, a truth I wasn't sure I wanted or deserved to hear. But for now, I just sat there, between shadow and light, listening to the house breathe. The day had not yet begun, and already it was ending something. Morning arrived like a careful witness, peering through the curtains with measured curiosity. I had laid out a porcelain cup and a small plate, as if hospitality could tame whatever she was bringing. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper, a scent that always feels like Sunday afternoons and unfinished letters. I straightened the rug by the door, then straightened it again. It's strange how we prepare for truth the same way we prepare for guests. Adjust a corner here, hide the mess there, smile as if the walls aren't listening. Her car door clicked shut at exactly 10. Punctuality can be a kind of power. When I opened the door, Evelyn stood in the quiet like she belonged to it. Beige trench coat, hair tucked behind one ear, eyes that catalogued everything. In her left hand, a neat folder the color of dried wheat. In her right, a small flash drive in a clear case. She wore perfume that reminded me of offices at dusk, floral at first, then something metallic underneath. "Mrs. Hale," she said, with that same velvet oversteel, "thank you for seeing me." "Please," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." She walked like someone trained not to leave footprints, careful, precise, self-contained. I led her to the living room. She didn't look at the photographs on the wall the way most visitors do. Not searching for a story, just confirming locations. The kind of glance I've seen at hospital check-ins and legal consultations. People who live among documents often forget the warmth of a face. "Would you like tea?" I asked. "I'm fine," she said, and sat on the edge of the couch, placing the folder on her knees as if it were alive. For a moment, we just listened to the clock. It's strange how time gets louder when two truths are about to collide. "I won't take much of your morning," she began. "I only came to close a loop." She watched my face as she said it, measuring the way the word touched me. I nodded for her to continue. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, neatly clipped into sections, each page annotated with a discreet, ruthless pen. Color-coded flags peered out like little tongues of warning. I recognized Robert's email address at the top, the familiar anchor, followed by lines that looked like sentences but felt like intruders. "Late meeting. Will run past 7. Client dinner extended. Your discretion means everything." Some messages were banal, almost boring, like small stones hiding a razor underneath. Others carried a warmth that didn't belong in office correspondence, a warmth I wanted to blame on poor phrasing or the looseness of exhaustion at midnight. There were timestamps I remembered, nights I waited with soup that melted from steam to skin, then to nothing. Evelyn's voice cut through. He asked me to keep certain things off the calendar. She kept her eyes on the pages, as if my face might burn them. Certain things, I repeated, tasting each letter like a bitter fruit. She slid a second stack forward. Photocopies of bank statements, transfers to an account with a name I didn't recognize, with notes that spiraled into vagueness. Consultancy, special retainer, deferred compensation. Money has a way of speaking clearly and saying nothing at all. Robert was generous, I murmured, unsure whether I meant it as a defense or a confession. Evelyn placed the flash drive gently on the table between us. Audio files, she said. A draft letter he dictated one evening. He said he owed the truth to someone. A microsecond pause. To you. My throat tightened. I'd heard his recorded voice on voicemails I couldn't delete, but the idea of him dictating a letter to someone else, in a room I had never entered, felt like a stranger using my key. Why bring this to me? I asked. Why now? Because he's gone, she said, and because I'm tired. The softness in her tone sounded rehearsed, yet not entirely false. Because his name matters, and yours. She folded her hands. And because newspapers have an appetite. There it was, the glint beneath the velvet. Not a threat exactly, but the shape of one. She didn't have to say the word. Some words stand in the doorway even when you don't invite them. I steadied my breath and looked at her the way a pianist studies the keys before playing a difficult piece. If this were meant to be kind, you would have mailed it, I said. Or burned it. My voice surprised me, not loud, not trembling, just ironed flat. Evelyn's mouth lifted into a smile that avoided her eyes. Kindness is fragile currency, Mrs. Hale. I'm here to be practical. Practical. I have learned that people call things practical when they want to remove the soul from the decision. She withdrew a final item, a sealed envelope with handwriting that made my heart tilt, the curve of the R, the deliberate cross of the T. He left this, she said, with me. A careful breath. For when the time was right. The time, apparently, was right now. I didn't reach for the envelope. Some objects change their weight when you touch them. I sensed this one would shift the floorboards beneath me. May I ask? She began, and then stopped. Did he ever explain his late nights? He explained everything, I said, and nothing. I picked up the flash drive. It was lighter than the keys I carry, lighter than the ring I no longer wear. Yet it altered the room the way thunder alters a sky. The air learned to wait. Do you want me to play it? She asked. No, I said. Not yet. Her shoulders released almost imperceptibly. Whether from relief or calculation, I couldn't tell. She resumed her litany, dates, places, small details worn smooth by repetition. She spoke about meetings, odd deposits, a conference in Phoenix that didn't match the conference list. Her memory was catalogued like a library drawer someone checked 3 times before leaving the building. And what do you want? I asked finally. For all of this. I kept my tone even, like a teacher who already knows the answer on a test. Her gaze swept the room, landing briefly on the wedding portrait by the window before returning to me. Recognition, she said, for what I endured, for what I protected. Protected, I echoed. From whom? From everyone, she replied, and her calmness faltered for a second, a tremor crossing her face like a leaf in shallow water. From a world that worships men who forget the bill for their promises. Promises. The room adjusted. It's a cruel thing, how the words of another woman can sound like your own old thoughts trying on a darker dress. She didn't say a number, not yet. People rarely price the first truth they show you. Evelyn, I said, and spoke her name as if it might tell me who she truly was. Did you love my husband? The question came out not as accusation, but as archaeology, a brush gently clearing the dust to reveal what lay underneath. She paused long enough for me to count 2 breaths, then met my eyes. I loved my place in his life, she answered, and he loved being seen. The honesty of it felt colder than a lie. Outside, a truck rattled past, and the dishes in the cabinet trembled in their quiet stacks. The house keeps such loyal records of the world's interruptions. She slid one email closer. "Read this," she said. "A message from Robert, late on a Wednesday. I owe you the truth, soon." Beneath it, a drafted message unsent. "I don't want to hurt Margaret. She believes in the good version of me." How many versions of a person can a house hold? How many floors can love stand on before the stairs give way? I folded my hands in my lap so she wouldn't see them tighten. "You could have come before," I said, "while he was alive." She dipped her chin. "People tend to be braver with the dead," she said, "and more generous." There it was, a price without a number. I stood because sitting suddenly felt like surrender. "Let me get you that tea," I said, not to be kind, but to create distance. In the kitchen, I measured leaves with care, listening to the soft machine of the kettle, remembering Robert's hands steadying the lid when it rattled. I poured the water and watched the amber spread like a bruise and then warm to honey. When I returned, she had drifted toward the bookshelf. Her fingers hovered just above the spines, not touching. "You like letters," she observed, spotting the collection bound in maroon. "Ordinary people, extraordinary honesty." "Letters don't lie," I said. "They wait." She considered that and lowered her eyes. "Some of them learn to lie," she murmured, "between drafts." We both knew this conversation had crossed into a room we hadn't named. I set the tea down. She didn't drink. "Why me?" I asked finally. "Why are you telling me and not the board, or the papers, or his partners who knew his calendars better than I did?" "Because you're the one who lives with the echo," she said. "The rest of them only hear the first sound." I looked at the folder again. It sat there like a neat box of matches on a dry day. "If I refuse whatever you're silently asking," I said, "what happens?" "Then we let the wind carry it," she replied. "And winds, Mrs. Hale, are never careful with names." A part of me wanted to laugh, not because anything was funny, but because absurdity sometimes protects you from a fall. Another part wanted to cry into the soft animals of my pillows. I did neither. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve and breathed the way I was taught to breathe in labor: count, loosen, return. "I need time," I said. She nodded as if she had already predicted the word. "I'll call in a few days," she said, gathering her calm like a shawl around her shoulders. Then she added, almost kindly, "You don't have to be afraid of truth, only of people who trade it." The sentence lodged in me like a small key to a door I hadn't found yet. She reached for the envelope, then hesitated. "Keep this," she decided, handing it over with 2 fingers, as if passing a relic. "You'll know when to open it." Her eyes flicked to the flash drive. "And that? Play it when you're ready to hear him without raising him." I walked her to the door. She paused on the threshold and glanced back at the living room, then at my face, as if she wanted to memorize the before to compare with the after. "I didn't come to hurt you," she said. "But pain arrives with its own shoes." "Then let it take them off at the door," I replied. I surprised myself again, measured, not cruel. She almost smiled. "He said you were strong," she murmured, and then stepped into the light. The door closed on her perfume, which lingered like a question. I stood with my hand on the knob until the street swallowed the sound of her car. The hallway felt longer than it had in years. I walked back to the table and looked at the objects Evelyn had left behind, the way a doctor looks at instruments before beginning something irreversible. The envelope's paper was thick, expensive, the handwriting unmistakable. The flash drive glinted with shamelessness. The folder waited, patient as winter. Have you ever had an object look back at you? As if it were measuring your courage before it offered its content? I thought of others who might have faced something similar. A message found in a drawer, a A text discovered by accident. A confession wrapped in apology. If you've ever opened something that changed the map of your heart, how did you recognize the moment before you did it? I didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Some truths require a ritual, not to make them grand, but to make you worthy. I turned to the living room window. Outside, the day had chosen brightness after all. The light came in clean strips across the carpet like lines awaiting signatures. Robert's chair sat peacefully in its corner, unaware that it had become a defendant. I poured the tea into the sink. It looked too golden for what the day had become. The house was quiet again, but the quiet had changed dialects. It no longer hummed with absence. It vibrated with a waiting that had muscles. I collected the folder, the flash drive, the envelope, and carried them to the study, my hands steady out of respect rather than confidence. I placed everything on the desk and sat. Breath in, breath out, hands flat, eyes open. There would be time to play the files, time to trace the money, time to decide whether love is a candle that burns cleaner when you trim its wick, or a fire that devours the room when you open a window. Not today. Today, I would begin by listening to what the house remembered. The scent of his cologne in the curtain, the indent of his elbow on the armrest, the echo of his laugh folded into the stairs. Memory is evidence too, not admissible in court perhaps, but decisive in a life. When evening crept in, I switched on the desk lamp. The light made a small summer over the papers. I slid the top page toward me and began to read, not to accuse, not to forgive, simply to understand the language of what had been hidden. And somewhere between one sentence and the next, I felt the first hairline crack in the story I had carried. It didn't shatter. It whispered. Change often enters as a draft. If you were here sitting across from me, I'd ask you something I now wish someone had asked me long ago. Have you ever protected a memory so fiercely that you didn't notice it was protecting you back from the rest of the truth? If your answer is yes, I wonder what you would do with this folder, this envelope, this voice trapped inside a stick of plastic. I traced the curve of Robert's R on the envelope with my fingertip. Soon, he had written to someone. Soon has a way of arriving without asking permission. I set the envelope down and looked once more at the flash drive. The house listened. The night leaned in. Somewhere, a siren wailed and then forgot what it wanted. I didn't press play. Not yet. But I knew I would. And when I did, I suspected the voice I'd hear would not be the one I remembered or feared. It would be a third voice, the one that lives between the person we love and the person they are when no one is watching. I would have to learn to recognize it. I would have to decide whether to answer. Before I turned off the lamp, I did one last dangerous thing. I imagined Evelyn in her apartment, shoes off, coat on a chair, counting the hours the way we count the distance to a storm. I realized then that her currency wasn't just money. It was a story she wanted me to buy. And I couldn't tell yet whether the price was set or negotiable. I closed the folder, let the room dim, and left the door slightly ajar. Some doors need to remain half open when you're not ready to choose. Tomorrow, I will examine every page with a magnifying patience. I will notice the wrong paper, the tired typos, the signature that slides where his hand always held firm. I will test the truth like someone tests a bridge before crossing it, and I will call her back. But tonight, I will sleep facing the window, because dawn has better manners when it knows you are watching. The next morning, the house felt heavier, as if it had inhaled Evelyn's perfume and decided not to exhale it. There's a silence that consoles and another that interrogates you. This was the second kind. It followed me from room to room, asking questions I couldn't yet translate. I didn't touch the folder right away. I brewed coffee first, the way Robert used to, though I never quite mastered his patience for perfect timing. The scent drifted through the kitchen, wrapping around the air like an old habit that refused to die. I poured it into his favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle, and then realized what I'd done. I poured it down the sink. Some ghosts prefer not to be served. When I finally sat at the desk, the light was pale and reluctant. Outside, the sky was a sheet of tin. The folder weighted like a confession written in another person's handwriting. I ran my finger along its edge. Paper cuts have always frightened me. Tiny, precise wounds that sting long after they close. Inside, the pages, the signatures, the ink that looked too new for a man who'd been gone 8 months. Evelyn's notes were small and tidy, confident. I wondered if confidence was the first disguise of deceit. I started with the emails. Some lines I could hear him saying, the rhythm of his phrasing, the polite restraint. But others bent too sharply toward sentiment. "You make the long days lighter," one read. "I trust you understand me better than most." He could have written it, or anyone could have, imitating the version of him that lived in public. There were typos. Robert never left typos. He used to tease me for them. He said they were like freckles, proof of being human. But he didn't tolerate them in his work. And there they were, small and smug, dotting the pages like evidence that didn't know it was confessing. I lifted the paper to the light. The watermark wasn't from the firm's standard stationery. The dates didn't match the projects I remembered. One email was supposedly sent from the hotel in Denver where he'd stayed for a conference. But I remembered calling him that night, his voice echoing with airport announcements, not the muffled quiet of a hotel room. Memory can betray you, yes, but not all memories lie. Some stand at attention, sharp as soldiers guarding the last piece of truth. I set the papers aside and picked up the envelope. His handwriting, deliberate, elegant, slid across the front. For Margaret. No date. No return address. Just the name, as if the word itself could anchor me. My hands trembled when I broke the seal. Inside, one sheet. The ink was faintly smudged, like someone had touched it before it dried. If you're reading this, something has already gone wrong. I never meant to build walls between us, but there are things I kept quiet for your sake, things I thought would die with me. If Evelyn brings this to you, trust her enough to listen, but not enough to believe. I froze. The letter went on, speaking in Robert's voice, or something close to it, about regret, duty, and guilt. But that one sentence eclipsed the rest. Trust her enough to listen, but not enough to believe. Was it possible Evelyn had shown me proof of her own undoing? Or was this part of the performance, an illusion of doubt crafted to deepen her control? I read it again. The phrasing, the ellipses, they felt off. Robert's letters always had balance. This one tripped over itself. My heart wanted it to be real. My mind wanted it to be impossible. I remembered his voice, steady, low, the kind that could turn apologies into lullabies. Could I recognize it through static and doubt? The flash drive waited beside the lamp, catching small halos of light. I hesitated. Once sound enters a room, you can't unhear it. Still, I pressed play. At first, only white noise, the familiar hum of an office, distant typing, the occasional shuffle of paper. Then his voice, fragmented but unmistakable. "I owe you the truth. I should have told you. It wasn't meant to go this far." Then silence. Then a faint cut, a jump. His tone changed slightly, softer now, almost sentimental. "She deserves peace. Don't let her drown in my mistakes." Static again. The recording ended. It could have been real, or edited. The pauses felt wrong, too measured, too deliberate, like someone had stitched fragments into a sentence that fit their story. I replayed it, twice. The more I listened, the less it sounded like him. Grief distorts memory, but lies have their own accent. I leaned back in the chair. The clock ticked with cruel precision. Somewhere outside, a bird called, one of those solitary cries that sound like questions with no language. My pulse was loud in my ears. Not fear exactly, something slower, heavier. The kind of emotion that builds foundations under you just to remove them an hour later. I looked again at the letter. His warning, if it was his, hovered like a line drawn in fog. Trust her enough to listen, but not enough to believe. Was it possible he had predicted her manipulation? Or was that the brilliance of the deceit, a message so carefully planted that it looked like defense instead of design? I found myself whispering into the air, "Robert, what have you left me with?" The house didn't answer, but the heater turned on with a sigh, as if exhaling secrets. It couldn't keep. I took a notebook from the drawer, the one I used for grocery lists and reminders, and began to write. Inconsistencies, paper texture, date of Denver conference. Evelyn's phrasing, rehearsed kindness. It looked absurd, like the beginning of an investigation I didn't want. Yet writing gave shape to the chaos. Every relationship has an archive, not of photographs or messages, but of gestures. The way he touched my shoulder when passing by. The way he said, "Wait," when he needed more time to think. The sound of his shoes on the stairs. Those are the documents that matter. And none of them match the story Evelyn was trying to sell. The afternoon darkened early, clouds pressing low over the neighborhood. I left the lamp on, the folder open. From time to time, I caught myself staring at the door, half expecting her to appear again. That's how manipulation works. It turns anticipation into dependence. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain returned, whispering down the glass in slow, deliberate lines. It looked almost like handwriting, as if the sky itself were rewriting the truth, one drop at a time. I whispered to the reflection, "Would you forgive someone who lied to protect you? Or would that lie still poison the peace they claimed to save?" The question wasn't for Robert. It was for whoever might be listening, the stranger behind the screen, perhaps, the one who knows what it's like to be both the protector and the betrayed. Because if you've ever discovered a truth that threatened the foundation of someone you loved, you know the feeling. The heart doesn't break. It reconfigures. It tries to build a new shape that can hold both love and disappointment without collapsing. I turned back to the desk. The lamp flickered, caught between power and surrender. I whispered, "She forged something. I just don't know what." That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't pray. I sat by the fire and listened to the rain swallow its own rhythm. And somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, a thought surfaced. Quiet, but precise. If she forged one thing, she could forge another. That's when I decided I wouldn't wait for Evelyn's next call. I would call her back, not with fear, but with curiosity. Because curiosity, when born from pain, becomes a weapon. I looked at the folder again, now marked with small notes, my own handwriting creeping alongside hers. It felt like we were writing the same story from opposite ends, destined to collide somewhere in the middle. When I finally went to bed, I left the folder open on the desk, deliberately. If truth wanted to visit again, I wanted it to find the door unlocked. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I thought I heard Robert's voice again. Not from the flash drive, not from memory, but from the quiet part of grief that still tries to protect you from what you're about to learn. He whispered, or maybe I imagined it, "Don't let her finish the story for you." By the third day, doubt had stopped whispering and begun arranging furniture. It sat with me at breakfast, followed me down the hallway, stood beside me in the mirror. Every reflection carried a question I didn't yet know how to phrase. I had spent hours cross-checking what Evelyn had shown me. Dates, amounts, words that no longer matched their original homes. Every trail led to a cul-de-sac of maybe. And yet, one thing wouldn't leave me alone. Robert's voice in that recording. Too smooth, too edited, like a confession rehearsed for an audience that never existed. So I did something uncharacteristic of me. I called her. She answered before the second ring, as if she had been waiting right beside the phone. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "I wondered if you'd call." I've thought about what you said, I replied, steadying my tone. About fairness, about recognition. You were right. Some things need to be faced properly. Why don't you come by tomorrow? Let's settle this in person. A pause, half surprise, half satisfaction. Of course, she said softly. I appreciate your willingness. I ended the call and sat in the stillness it left behind. Willingness? What a delicate word for surrender. But I wasn't surrendering. Not this time. That night, I pulled out a small voice recorder I'd once used to record Robert's ideas for his lectures. I tested it. The red light blinked to life, a small pulse of certainty in a room full of ghosts. I placed it inside the wooden cabinet beside the armchair, exactly where her voice would fall when she sat down. I had also found something else while sorting through Robert's study, an old voicemail, saved accidentally in the cloud. It was from a week before his last trip, his voice, calm and warm. Margaret, I'll be home early tonight. I've been thinking about how much noise fills the world and how quiet you make it feel. I don't say that enough. I love you. Don't worry about the firm. Everything's fine. The recording was real. The tone was human. It was the kind of voice no forgery could imitate. If Evelyn wanted to trade in illusions, then let her hear the sound of truth. The next morning was unnervingly bright. The kind of sunlight that makes even lies look honest. I arranged the room carefully. No clutter, no traces of nerves. The folder lay on the table, open to the page with Robert's supposed confession. The flash drive sat beside it, untouched. The envelope rested on top like an unspoken verdict. At exactly 10 again, the doorbell rang. Punctual, precise, and sharp, like the rhythm of her entire existence. Evelyn, I greeted, opening the door. Margaret, she said this time. No title, just my name. A signal that the game had changed. She walked in as if she'd been here before, which, in a way, she had. Through words, through insinuations. Would you like tea? I asked again. Yes, she said this time, smiling faintly. Thank you. We sat facing each other, sunlight drawing faint gold patterns on the carpet between us. I read everything, I began. The emails, the transfers, even the letter. I've come to a decision. Her chin lifted a little, anticipation disguised as empathy. And? I think you deserve something for your honesty, I said, letting the words settle like dust. But before we discuss what that means, there's something I'd like to play for you. I pressed a button on the small speaker beside me. Robert's voice filled the room. Margaret, I'll be home early tonight. Evelyn froze. The smile cracked, barely, but enough. Her hands, always so still, fidgeted once with the seam of her sleeve. Do you recognize that voice? I asked gently. Of course, she said. He was sentimental sometimes. Was he? I tilted my head. Because this recording was from the week before the trip, when he supposedly sent you those emails from Denver. The night you claim he was dictating that letter. A long silence. The kind that makes walls listen. Her mouth opened, then closed. He might have recorded several things, she said finally. You know how he was, methodical. He was, I agreed, methodical enough to never use hotel Wi-Fi for business, methodical enough to never send confidential emails from personal devices, and methodical enough to use the firm's stationery, not this cheap imitation you handed me. I reached into the folder and held up one of her pages. The watermark caught the light. This paper, I said quietly, was discontinued 4 years ago. The company changed suppliers. Robert noticed. He mentioned it once at dinner. Said the new texture made the pens bleed. She said nothing. The room pulsed with the quiet panic of someone who knows the floor is giving way. I've checked the signatures too, I continued. The loops are wrong, too round. He wrote like a man who was always half distracted. The pen dragged. Yours doesn't. Her breathing quickened, though her face tried to stay calm. You think I forged them, she said, almost laughing. That's ridiculous. Not ridiculous, I said softly. Just desperate. I leaned forward, voice calm, deliberate. You said he promised you something. What did he promise, Evelyn? Her eyes flickered. That's not relevant. It's exactly relevant, I said, because people don't blackmail for money alone. They blackmail for meaning. And you want him to have loved you. Her face went pale, then flushed with something between rage and humiliation. He did, she burst out. He told me you'd understand, that he'd make things right after the board meeting. He said many things to many people, I interrupted gently. But I've found no trace of you in his calendar. Not a single meeting, not a single memo, not a single expense with your name. It's as if you existed only in your own story. She stood abruptly, the chair groaning against the floor. You think you're above him, that just because you wore his ring, you knew every part of him. You didn't. He was lonely. I raised a hand. Stop. The word carried more authority than volume. It filled the space like a closed door. I don't doubt that he was lonely, I said. We all are, in our own ways, but loneliness doesn't make lies true. She stood there trembling, her control unraveling thread by thread. I could see it, the moment she realized she was no longer steering the story. You recorded this, didn't you? She said suddenly, her voice trembling with indignation. Of course, I replied. It's only fair. You recorded him once, didn't you? Her lips parted, but no words came. Evelyn, I said softly, you came here with papers that accuse a dead man, but all they prove is your grief over promises that were never yours to keep. Tears welled up, not soft, redemptive tears, but frustrated ones, the kind that taste like metal. He used me, she whispered. You both did. I let silence sit between us, neither confirming nor denying. Sometimes silence is the most honest verdict. Finally, she gathered the folder, the drive, and the letter, but I stopped her hand gently. Leave them, I said. Let them belong to no one for a while. She hesitated. What will you do with them? Let the truth breathe, I said. That's something neither of us has done. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she dropped her gaze and walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned back, eyes glassy but defiant. He promised me something, she said again. He said I'd never be forgotten. I met her eyes. He was right, I said quietly. You won't be. When the door closed, the air shuddered. I stood still, listening to her footsteps fade, until only the sound of the clock remained, steady, merciless, free. I sat down, the adrenaline retreating into exhaustion. My hands were cold, my chest tight, but my mind clear. I had not won, but I had stopped losing. I looked at the folder she'd abandoned. It felt different now, no longer a weapon, but an artifact. Proof that even lies can leave fingerprints of truth, the hunger to matter, the fear of being erased. Outside, a faint drizzle began again, tapping softly against the glass. It sounded almost like applause. I thought of all the people who keep their dignity quiet, who swallow humiliation to preserve peace. Sometimes, silence is not weakness, it's strategy, but silence also has a cost. And mine, I realized, had reached its limit. Tomorrow, I would visit Robert's lawyer. I would turn over every page, every recording. The truth, in whatever form it came, would no longer be buried in someone else's version of the past. Before turning off the light, I asked the room a question that maybe others have asked too. How much of love survives after the truth arrives? Because perhaps that's what forgiveness really is. Learning to love the pieces that remain after the illusions dissolve. I smiled faintly, not from joy, but from relief. The kind that comes when you finally exhale after holding your breath for too long. I whispered into the dim light. Thank you, Robert, for warning me, for teaching me that even shadows have outlines. The wind shifted outside, carrying the faint scent of rain and lilac. Somewhere, a door creaked softly, as if the house itself was stretching after years of tension. Tomorrow, I would reclaim my peace, not by destroying what she brought, but by letting it exist without power. Still, before leaving the room, I looked once more at the envelope, at the traces of his hand, at the tremor between what's written and what's meant. Because the truth, once invited in, never leaves quietly. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished with me yet. Morning came soft and gold, as if the night had decided to forgive me. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a witness. It felt like a companion that had finally exhaled. The air was different, lighter. It smelled of rain that had done its work. I woke early, before the clock, before the kettle, before the small sorrows of the day could find their usual place. I stood by the window and let the light touch my face. It was gentle, like a hand that knew where not to press. The folder still waited on the desk, but its power had faded. Paper loses authority once you've looked it in the eye. I didn't rush to open it again. I made tea, slow and quiet, letting the water reach a boil the way truth finally reaches understanding. Patient, persistent, inevitable. When I sat down, I noticed something I hadn't before. A single line on the last page of Robert's supposed letter, faintly indented but not inked. Someone had written and then erased it. I tilted the paper toward the light until the words appeared like a ghost surfacing through fog. I thought I was protecting you. I only ended up hiding behind you. It wasn't Evelyn's sentence. It was his. I recognized the phrasing, the rhythm of guilt disguised as care. He had written it, then changed his mind. And somehow, that small, half-erased confession broke me more than all the fabrications combined. Because truth, even when hidden, leaves fingerprints. I folded the page gently and smiled. A sad kind of smile. The kind that understands love and disappointment can sleep in the same bed. Then I did something simple. I placed the folder in a clean envelope and sealed it. I didn't burn it, didn't destroy it. Some things deserve to rest intact, not out of nostalgia, but respect for the journey they forced you to take. At noon, I took a walk to the attorney's office. The path was familiar. Past the bakery where Robert used to buy cinnamon rolls on Sundays. Past the churchyard that still smelled faintly of lilies from the last funeral. Every step felt like reclaiming inches of myself I hadn't walked in months. Mr. Alden, Robert's old friend and our family's lawyer, looked up when I entered. His expression softened with the kind of understanding that doesn't need language. I placed the envelope on his desk. "These," I said, "belong to the truth now. Not to grief, not to gossip." He studied me for a moment. "Are you certain you're ready for whatever they hold?" "I'm not sure readiness is the point," I replied. "I just don't want lies to be the last thing carrying his name." He nodded slowly. "You've always had more courage than you think." "Not courage," I said. "Just exhaustion from fear." He smiled faintly and promised to handle everything discreetly. As I turned to leave, he added, "For what it's worth, Margaret, I never once saw Robert look at anyone the way he looked at you." Outside, the wind had changed, lighter, playful even. The street smelled of earth and renewal. When I returned home, I opened every window. Sunlight moved across the floor like forgiveness, learning to walk again. The air filled with movement, curtains breathing, pages fluttering, clocks ticking freely. And then, I sat at the desk and began to write. Not to Evelyn, not to the lawyer, not even to Robert, but to myself. "There comes a moment," I wrote, "when love stops asking to be perfect and simply asks to be honest." I think I've reached that moment. I don't need to know every secret he kept. I only need to remember the parts that were true. My hand trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear. It was life returning to its edges. For hours I wrote. About the sound of rain on glass, about the way forgiveness doesn't erase but redefines, about the small grace of surviving yourself. Words flowed like breath I hadn't known I was holding. When I finished, the sun was setting, and the world had that amber stillness that feels like applause after a long confession. I walked to the living room. Robert's chair was still there, patient, familiar. I sat in it for the first time since he died. The leather was cool, then warm. It didn't feel like trespassing anymore. It felt like inheritance. There was a kind of peace in the quiet, not the brittle silence of shock, but the tender one that follows acceptance. I thought of Evelyn, where she might be, whether she'd found whatever she was really looking for. I no longer hated her. Pity is just love that has lost its strength to fight. Maybe she too was a widow of a different kind, mourning the man she thought existed. I whispered a prayer for both of us, not for mercy, but for release. Later that evening, I sat by the window again and pressed play on Robert's old voicemail, not the doctored ones, but the real one, the one that began with my name said softly, like a word he still loved saying. It didn't hurt anymore. It just reminded me that once we were real, and that was enough. The night settled over the house like a shawl. The stars came out one by one, modest and punctual. I could almost hear the world turning, a reminder that even endings have rhythm. Before I went to bed, I opened a blank page in my notebook and wrote a single sentence. There's no silence cleaner than the one that follows a whole truth. Then I added another, almost without thinking. Tomorrow I'll record a new message, not for the past, but for whoever still listens. Maybe someone out there, another woman, standing in the ruins of her own certainty, would hear it and feel less alone. Maybe that's what healing is. Not forgetting the pain, but recycling it into something that reaches others. The house dimmed, the kettle cooled. My heart, for the first time, felt weightless. I blew out the candle on the desk and whispered into the dark, "Good night, Robert. Rest now. I finally am." The rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, not mourning this time, but baptizing. Outside, the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like pages of a book finally closing. Inside, I smiled, because the story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about freedom, quiet, dignified, earned, and tomorrow, perhaps, it would begin again.